Good evening. We're glad you could join us for this week's Andrews webinar. We're pleased to introduce you today to Dr. Adam Meadows. Dr. Meadows is a board-certified psychiatrist who has been with Skyland Trail, a nonprofit mental health treatment organization based in Atlanta since 2016. Dr. Meadows graduated summa cum laude with a bachelor's in biology from Andrews University and received his medical degree from Washington University in St. Louis School of Medicine. He completed his psychiatry residency at the University of Pennsylvania, where he served as chief resident in his final year. His clinical interests include mood disorders, adult ADHD, and mental health concerns affecting college and graduate students. Dr. Meadows is passionate about making a positive impact in people's lives and is committed to efforts to improve social dialogue and reduce stigma around mental health issues. After Dr. Meadows' presentation, there will be a Q&A, so feel free to type your questions into Zoom chat. You can send it privately to Andrews alumni or message us privately on Facebook, and we'll be happy to share your question with him. So we'll turn it over now to Dr. Adam Meadows.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura, for those kind words, and it's nice to be connected with some familiar faces and familiar voices in the Andrews alumni world. It's a bit surreal to think that it's been 16 years since I was there at Berrien Springs, and so very, very grateful for fond memories from studying at the Science Complex to meaningful conversations with friends at Berman Hall. So again, very, very grateful and appreciative to have this opportunity to talk about mental health and managing anxiety at a very unique time in all of our lives. And so I'm hoping this presentation today is useful, and that you all who are listening either live or watching it later can leave with a renewed sense of hope and encouragement, and also with some practical tips on how to navigate this as we face a lot of anxiety and a lot of uncertainty. But before we get into the meat of that conversation, just wanted to extend some acknowledgments to those around the world who are on our front lines. Those doctors, nurses, other healthcare professionals, delivery personnel, all of the essential workers, and really extending that to all of us. That at this point in time, we are all essential, and we are all doing our part to navigate, again, a very challenging time. So, I want to make this more of a conversation. So, as Laura said, as you guys have questions, during this talk, please, send them either in the chat feature if you're on Zoom, or through Facebook Messenger, and we'll kind of save those for the Q&A portion. And so, I think my hope in this is that we have kind of three primary objectives in this conversation. One is to understand the mental and emotional effects of COVID-19 in terms of the pandemic and the consequences of that in terms of our psychological health. Secondly is to, as I said earlier, to provide a sense of hope and encouragement. I know I've had conversations with a lot of friends and colleagues and even patients who are feeling discouraged and feeling overwhelmed and feeling confused or uncertain on who to trust or what to do next, or how to just manage the day-to-day realities. And so hopefully through this conversation and many others, you can have, again, a sense of hope and a sense of clarity for next steps. And along those lines, the third point being able to develop a personal action plan. So being able to take away something from this where you can say, you know what, okay, from what he discussed or from what he shared, I can commit to trying this as the next step to improve my personal wellness through this. And there's a quote that I like that says, the only wrong action is no action at all. And so, really giving yourself permission to draw something tangible from this and use it in your day-to-day life as we navigate this COVID-19 pandemic. And so, I'll plan to talk for about 20 or 25 minutes, and then we'll shift into the Q&A portion and hopefully continue a rich dialogue through there. So before we dive in on what to do, wanted to just have a brief recap on what happened and kind of what this is. I know many of us started this new year, 2020, very hopeful, right? A lot of us were making New Year's resolutions or other, commitments, or had a certain vision for what this year would look like. I remember, my wife and I back in January attended a wellness seminar hosted by Oprah Winfrey here in Atlanta, and the theme was, 2020 vision, your year in focus. And I remember leaving that session, just really invigorated and pumped up and really excited about what was ahead, both kind of personally and within our family and also professionally. And then, like a thief in the night, almost, COVID-19 hit, and I remember those first kind of murmurings of it back in early March, where we were getting the news reports from what was happening overseas, over in China, and also in parts of Italy, and then just very quickly things escalating, here in the States. And I'm sensitive to the fact that we have a global alumni network, so I know there are people all over the world with Andrew's ties that are affected by this. And so, again, extending my direct sympathy, to all of us, and all of you out there who are navigating this. And I think that's been part of what's been so hard, is just the speed and the abruptness with which this happened. And so it's one thing when we're able to prepare for what's coming. Let's say commonly we will have alerts when there's bad weather, right? Like, let's say there's an impending snowstorm or tornado. We're used to checking the weather alerts, or our weather apps saying, tornado watch or storm coming, so that you can make the necessary preparations so that when it does happen, yes, it's still difficult, but at least you have a sense of preparedness, for that. I think in many cases, this felt differently. And very specifically, there was a few things. One is the, kind of, again, the abruptness and the speed of what happened. But again, the sense of loss of control and the loss of what was normal. I've had a lot of conversations, with other people about, quote, getting back to normal, and how the things that we understood as normal, in terms of where we went to work or how we went to work, how we congregated at church services and other forms of worship, how we attended concerts or sporting events. A lot of our regular outlets for community and connection, or even entertainment, going to restaurants, for example, that was all disrupted and all at once. And so I think it wasn't, since it wasn't this kind of staggered, progressive thing, it was a very broad, sweeping, immediate change that has made it, even harder to navigate and to process. And so, part of what is common to all of us is the theme of uncertainty. I was reading a Facebook quote at one point saying that this pandemic is the great equalizer, in the sense that many of us are affected differently in terms of economic impact, personal health impact, family impact, etc. But the one common for all of us is the level of uncertainty that all of us, to some degree, are having to navigate a very different reality now than what we came into the year experiencing. And so, wanting to share that just kind of as a foundation for setting the stage for what happens to our minds and to our psyche when we're faced with mass uncertainty. And so next, I want to talk through some of the common emotions that many of us are experiencing during this time. And those things can include feelings of depression or sadness, feelings of anger or frustration, feelings of fear and anxiety, or even feelings of grief and loss. And I want to spend a little time unpacking the fear and anxiety response in the next section, but for now, just kind of thinking through some of these others. So I know, particularly when it comes to not being able to see loved ones, right? Like a feeling of disconnection, a feeling of missing loved ones who maybe because of their own personal health issues or because of other precautions, you're not able to spend time together in the same way. And there's a certain, sadness and disconnection with that. And also, thinking about feelings of anger and frustration, that when we're confused, when we don't know what's happening to us, when we feel like the way we want our leaders or our government to respond is not happening in that way. Again, it's a cause for unrest, and we commonly look for something to blame or something to assign responsibility to. And again, I hope as we have this conversation, we'll be able to shift from that. So being able to come to a place of non-judgment, a place of acceptance, and a place of love being part of what the response looks like. But also just some acknowledgement that yes, it makes sense and it's okay to feel confused or to feel angry or to feel frustrated. And these are all the effects of what massive uncertainty does. And then mentioning grief and loss, wanted to talk about that a little bit, both in the literal sense for individuals who, unfortunately may have lost a loved one to COVID-19 and not being able to be at the bedside in the hospital, not being able to have proper funeral services or other types of goodbye ceremonies for these individuals. That there's a very real level of mourning that is associated with this. And then, related to that is what I'd like to call more figurative or experiential loss. And certainly, the effects of that can be just as impactful. Many people, particularly here in the U.S. And around the world, are experiencing a very different economic reality, either having to take pay cuts or being furloughed or being unemployed. Our unemployment numbers have skyrocketed in the recent weeks, and that again adds another layer to the financial uncertainty of how people are going to pay their bills and feed their families. And so that certainly can create a sense of loss and despair for many people. And also the relational losses, right? So, I'm someone who thrived on the ability of being able to go to a place of work, going to a certain building and seeing my colleagues and my friends and being able to interact with patients face to face, and now having to pivot and do that from home using technology, right? And that some of the things that we drew comfort from or were attached to in terms of familiarity, going to school, going to colleges, going to places of worship, going to restaurants, our favorite restaurant or favorite movie theater, etc., that those are not accessible anymore. And that is a sense of loss. And so I think, part of the healing process or part of the solution starts with recognition and acknowledgement of that sense of loss. And so my first invitation to those of you watching is to check in with yourself emotionally and give yourself permission to feel that grief and to have those bad feelings. But what we're going to talk about as next steps is how to not allow those bad feelings to then become your reality or dictate how you make decisions. And so just kind of walking through common emotions: depression, sadness, fear and anxiety, grief and loss, anger and frustration, and probably even some other things. It's very common for each of us to experience these things in waves, and that our emotional cycle is it's a non-linear process. We can, even within a day, experience a number of these varying emotions. And so when we look at fear and anxiety, I wanted to spend a little bit of time unpacking that more from a biologic and kind of physiologic level. So I like to think of the fear response as our kind of internal alarm system. So when we think from a perspective of survival and kind of how we navigate avoiding threats or avoiding danger, there are parts of our brain that are wired to kind of come online and to guide us through that process. And so some of you may be familiar with what we call the fight or flight response. And there's a third response called freeze, which we'll kind of talk through as well. So the fight or flight response is mediated by parts of our brain that then give signals to our sympathetic nervous system. So that's the part of our nervous system that is in charge for increasing our heart rate and pumping more blood to different parts of our body, causing our pupils to dilate, causing our breathing to change, to deliver more oxygen, and preparing us to either fight, to face our threat or whatever is attacking us, or to run away. And, when we bring this back to, how this manifests during COVID-19, we certainly see these things playing out. So, one example of the fight response is us kind of going on the attack when it comes to what is commonly known as panic buying. So these are, the instances of us making, runs on the grocery store for toilet paper and for water, thinking that we need to stock up, not knowing when we'll have the next opportunity to either go out to get more, or due to fear of scarcity, a fear of shortage. Some of you may have even seen some of the recent news reports about the meat industry and the different meat plants here in America that may be facing shortages because of these concerns. So again, that plants another seed of fear in terms of scarcity. Is there going to be a shortage of some important resource, whether it's food, water, shelter, etc., that we then go into fight mode to try to acquire as much as we can now to ward off any risk of a shortage. Also, kind of thinking about the fight response when it comes to protecting the health of our loved ones. I was talking to a friend last weekend who was out at a park here in Atlanta, wearing appropriate face mask and maintaining physical distancing from other people. And he was with his wife and kids, and he expressed concern with other individuals who were not wearing face masks, who were kind of meandering in and out the path, not being mindful of those kind of the 6-foot boundary. And so that again kind of triggered his protective instinct to pull his wife and children closer and to kind of step aside, again due to fear of risk and wanting to protect and prevent anything bad from happening. And so again, this is an instinctual kind of survival mechanism that gets triggered for many of us. You may have seen this play out sometimes on social media or within politics, that people have strong opinions about what's happening and about what should happen in terms of the response, and very commonly get into online shouting matches, for lack of a better word. So commenting very aggressively or in a hostile manner, taking sides, and just creating even more division and kind of polarization from this. And that's something I want to highlight as what I would call the second contagion, right? So one is the virus itself, and then the other is the effects of what that is doing to us in terms of creating division, creating animosity, creating judgment, creating blame. And really, that's the part, hopefully through this conversation and through some of the tips that I'll share later, that we can be more mindful of kind of how we're showing up and how we're responding when we're engaging, or when our fight response is being triggered. Conversely to that, we think about the flight response. So that is the desire to escape or to flee and kind of run away. So that can take the form of avoidance, denial, not leaving your house, not checking the news, not wanting to hear or read or listen to anything related to coronavirus, just wanting to escape the whole thing. Some people have perhaps left their homes and gone to other places. If they're living in densely populated areas or some of the hot spots like New York City, people may have actually left again out of a protective response to try to minimize their exposure to the threat. And so again, this is not any judgment of that, but just showing how our behaviors can result from triggers that fear and anxiety bring up. And then the third response, what I call freeze, is think of that as the kind of deer in headlights response, right? So think of that as people who when you just feel stuck and you don't know what to do, and it's like analysis paralysis, right? Or a deer in headlights. If you've been on a country road before driving and it's dark at night and there's not a lot of lights, and next thing you know, in your headlights you see a deer kind of frozen there. That's another common fear response where you're not sure what to do. You feel somewhat overwhelmed or somewhat helpless to take action. So you just don't do anything. You kind of stay stuck. And again, not that any of these are right or wrong or better or worse, but again, common reactions to what fear does biologically and physiologically. And chances are each of us experience some version of this or version of all three throughout this process. And so, I say this from a point of education, just to be aware and be mindful when you're feeling a reaction, kind of checking in with yourself. Okay, am I wanting to go on the attack and kind of fight what's happening in front of me? Am I feeling like I need to run away, or do I feel stuck? And then being aware of kind of your starting point will better equip you to think about which solution or which strategy to implement to then move to a better spot, a better place. So that's kind of some context and overview of what happens on a kind of a mental and emotional level, as well as a physiologic level, when we're faced with uncertainty. And I think the other piece when it comes to this pandemic specifically is that there's a theory in psychology called cognitive dissonance, where what you see outwardly, or what the information that you're presented with, doesn't fit your paradigm or your belief system or your expectations. So there's some level of disconnect between what you're seeing kind of factually or data wise versus what you would interpret that information to mean. So for instance, when we're asked to take precautions because there's a hurricane coming, and then the hurricane comes and we see, devastation and debris on the streets, and, all the destruction that can come from a bad hurricane, visually that makes sense to us to say, man, yeah, this was unsafe, this was dangerous. I do need to take precautions and, shelter down, etc. In this case, for many of us, unless we're on the front lines in a hospital or in an ICU, or with a loved one who's affected, or if we are personally affected, separate from that, when we go out or when we just, look outside, in many parts of America, it's nice weather now, it's springtime, we're not able to see this threat as easily. And so that creates even more fear and uncertainty, because it's like, it's an invisible threat. It's the invisible enemy, right? I think that's what it's been named, in more kind of informal terms. And so just being mindful of why, just adding some context as to why this is harder to stomach and harder to make sense of, is because when we can see our enemy, when we can name it, when we can understand how it approaches and how it affects us, we feel more empowered to do something about it. When we can't see it, when it's changing, or when it's hard to track or hard to predict, that adds more uncertainty and feelings of helplessness to us, which then exacerbates the fear and anxiety response. So saying all that as a foundation to how we got to where we are today. So now let's switch to a little bit more of the hopeful tone on what we can do. How can we actually take control and find some stability, find wellness during this time? And so there are 6 different bullet points that I'm going to walk through in terms of some tactical things that we can do. So first, I would say, the first intervention is what I call control the controllables. So we don't always choose what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond, right? And so we can choose how we behave, how we engage with other people, how we treat ourselves, the type of information that we feed ourselves during this time. And so this is definitely a time to double down on the basics of healthy living. So being mindful about what you're eating, drinking adequate, water and staying hydrated, finding time to get exercise. Many of us who are used to working out at office buildings or walking around, a school campus, now we're, confined to our homes, or maybe working from home and doing a lot more sitting than what we would normally do. And so I've made it a point to literally get up and stretch and take breaks during the day, create opportunities for movement throughout your day. So if you're, physically healthy enough to actually do some cardiovascular exercise, that would be excellent. Even 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week. But short of that, getting up to walk, get some fresh air. If you have pets, take your pets for a walk, maybe go a little bit longer on that walk than what you would normally go, just to kind of create movement and decrease the chances of being too sedentary during this time. Also, I think creating small moments of normalcy is also something that we can control. And so, as you guys can see now, I'm wearing a sweater and a collared shirt. If I were to stand up, you'd see that I'm wearing business slacks. And so I dress the part for work, even though I'm working from home on a computer. I dress the part as if I were in the office, because again, that tells my brain that I'm in work mode, right? It gives me something tangible that I can control, that helps to represent a sense of professionalism and kind of cues my mind into work. And again, I'm not saying this is the standard wardrobe for all of us, but just think about what was healthy about normal for you before, and think and see if there are ways to implement that now on a smaller scale. And again, the goal of this is not to replicate the way things were, because that can lead to frustration, because it's not going to feel the same, right? I think on some level we have to accept things are different and it won't feel the same. But at the same time, we can make our best effort to replicate those small nuggets of normalcy throughout the day. Okay, so control the controllables. Second thing that we can do along these same lines is what I call prioritizing self-care. So this is absolutely a time not for selfishness, but for self-care and self-preservation, right? And so that can take the form of carving out time in your schedule each day for you and only you. Maybe it's a quiet space in your house where you can sit and read. Maybe it's listening to your favorite song 10, 15 minutes a day. Maybe it's going outside on your back porch or taking a walk by yourself for a few minutes a day. But it's that being in relationship with yourself and making yourself a priority through this time is a crucial, crucial step. And as an extension of that, this is also a time for grace and self-compassion toward yourself and to others. But in the spirit of self-care, being gentle with yourself, right? Using kind words to yourself as you're thinking about, what you need to do for the day. Reframing expectations. If you would normally be able to do, 4 or 5 things during a normal day, maybe you pare that down to 2 or 3, and that's enough, right? So giving yourself permission to realize that that's enough. You don't have to be a superhero through this. I know for, a lot of parents out there who are working at home now and have their kids at home and are tasked with responsibilities of homeschooling or doing, supporting your children with their online school. That's a lot on your plate, right? And so don't feel like you have to do it perfectly or that you have to do it, consistently every day. There was an Instagram meme that I saw related to this where it says, we are not working from home. We are staying home during a pandemic trying to work, right? And just that simple reframe of realizing, what, this is not a normal situation. This is not what I have chosen to do. This is a situation that I'm forced into. And with that, how can I have some grace and compassion toward myself, to my loved ones, the people that I'm living with, to just kind of dial it back a little bit and be a little bit kinder and gentler to ourselves and to other people. Okay, so that's self-care, the second bullet point. Third bullet point is finding connection. That is critical. I was actually just on a work teleconference meeting before this session where we were talking about being more intentional with the language of the recommendations, meaning instead of saying social distancing, what we really are implying is physical distancing. And in fact, this is a time where we need social connection now more than ever, right? We've got people that are who are living alone, who feel isolated, who are lonely. This is a time of needing connection and companionship. And perhaps we have to do that virtually, but some amount of connection, I think, is better than none. And so this is absolutely a time to do, text message group threads and FaceTime calls and jumping on Zoom hangout meetings, or just even one-on-one. If there was a friend that you've been thinking about who you haven't caught up with in a while, send them that text, make that phone call. This is the time. We are all in this together, and people are, I would think, probably in a more understanding and forgiving spirit, hopefully, so that they can extend you grace. If you haven't reached, connected in a number of years, who cares? Like, now is the time. This is the time to reach out and to find connection. And also, for those of you who, again, I want you to be mindful of your personal health risk and consult with your healthcare provider if you have questions about this. But if you're healthy enough to be outdoors, again, using proper precautions. I know some people who've had some physical distancing picnics, right, where they're staying at least 6 feet away, they're not touching, but they're at least able to have some in-person visibility, even if there's no physical contact. So again, please be mindful of your household and your individual risk, but also being creative with, now is a time for connection. We've got families now able to have dinner together for the first time in perhaps months. Before, with different work schedules and school schedules, it's hard to be home together. And now that we're afforded that opportunity, really seeing this as an opportunity. So kind of turning your mind from crisis and chaos and what's missing to looking for the good, looking for the opportunities for connection during this time. Okay. Um, Fourth bullet point, being mindful of social media use or media consumption overall. So really thinking about, and I've been guilty of this personally. I've sometimes find myself kind of mindlessly scrolling on Facebook or Instagram, and I have to say, okay, well, let me take a break from this. So I think it could be very helpful to have device-free times during your day, or device-free zones within your home. So if at the dinner table, maybe that's a device-free zone where the iPads, the iPhones are somewhere else, and you guys are literally connecting during dinner. You're having a conversation, you're having dialogue. Or, I always recommend at least an hour before bedtime that you cease technology use. So putting the phone down, putting the iPad, the Kindle, anything that has, that blue light that's going to kind of keep your brain awake, kind of putting that down and making some dedicated time and space for winding down and relaxing, before going to bed. And just not consuming what I call empty calories on social media. It's easy to just, you don't have to look for it. You can just show up on Facebook and you're guaranteed to see a COVID-19 post, some sad news about someone dying, the numbers going up, skyrocketing, different theories about what's happening and different political agendas being behind this, all of that stuff. And so really encouraging you all to filter out the noise and be very intentional, right? Like make social media work for you. So you can, if you're going to go on Instagram, type in something uplifting, right? If you're going to go on a video page, type in, a video of something that is going to energize you and make you feel good and inspire you, right? Like now is the time to, again, double down on the healthy habits, the uplifting things that were part of your life before COVID-19, rather than letting the media and social media dictate what you're supposed to be watching. Fifth thing, and again, just this is second to last bullet point. So point number 5 is tying into finding connection, I would say, is being of service, right? So part of what the fear response does, or the anxiety response does, is creates a mindset of scarcity and a mindset of lack, and leads to kind of hoarding behaviors or kind of holding in. This is the time to do the opposite. Find ways to practice sharing and giving, right? This is a time for love and generosity and being of service. Maybe you're in a position financially to be of financial support to someone, to a church community, to a charity, to a friend, to a family member. Maybe you are in a position to give of your time, or give of your influence, or give some other resource. And I think that is absolutely healing during this time, and is the antidote to fear and uncertainty, right? When we practice giving, it takes us outside of ourselves, helps to kind of take us outside of the tunnel vision and expand our awareness to all the good that is out there. And I'm a firm believer that, in life, you will find what you're looking for. So if you're looking for opportunities of good and kindness and charity and generosity, you will find that. In the same vein, if you're looking for the fear mongering and the hate and the anger and the blame, you'll find that too. So I'm encouraging you to look for the good and to be of service during this time. And lastly, particularly relevant to this audience, is to lead into your faith, right? This is absolutely a time for active faith. There is no faith without uncertainty, right? And so this is a time for us to realize that there is, someone or something bigger than us helping us to navigate through this time and to find time for prayer, for meditation, to think outside of yourself, to find ways of practicing a sense of connection and community is an important time, and to really lean into your faith and recognize that, you know, there is grace through this process. There is a way out, there is a way through, and that way is through connection and through faith and through togetherness. And so just a couple plugs, quick plugs for some resources that you guys can access online. And then I also wrote a book recently that I think can be helpful as a point of guidance through this time of uncertainty. And so briefly, you know, this is absolutely a time to ask for help and to reach out for resources. So for those of you who are experiencing any symptoms of, you know, stress or anxiety or mental health, there's a lot of great online therapy resources. And I can, you know, link those in the comments at some point if you'd like. But just a couple off the top of my head. Talkspace is an app or an online therapy resource, as well as BetterHelp and 7 Cups are also kind of online virtual resources, again, with licensed therapists, licensed mental health professionals to help you work through any individual or family-related stress or mental health issues during this time. Also downloading maybe some meditation apps. There's the Headspace app, there's the Calm app. Headspace specifically, they're offering, I think, a free 1-year membership for healthcare professionals that have an NPI number. So that would be kind of a nice perk to have. For those of you who've been attending church and not able to attend church, you know, see if your church has an online streaming service. You know, I know a lot of the churches do. So even if you can't gather in person, you can still access, you know, worship with other people online. And, you know, making time to learn, right? So either through local colleges and universities that offer online curriculums. There's also a website called Coursera that offers free online classes from some of the premier universities here in America. And then thinking about physical wellness, you know, if you're not able to go to a gym or go to a yoga studio, maybe reach out to those places and see if any of their trainers are able to offer individual services or virtual workouts, right? So I know I've taken advantage of that, where our trainer has done a individual, a virtual workout rather, which is, you know, safe, but can provide that sense of accountability and motivation. And lastly, just a quick plug. Wrote a book recently. I'm just trying to get a clear shot here. It's called A Prescription for Living with Purpose, Maintaining Hope, Healing, and Connection as You Create the Life You Were Destined to Live. And so this is a message of hope and clarity and how to understand your purpose, and some practical tips on kind of navigating the normal pitfalls that come with the journey of self-improvement and personal development. And absolutely, this is a time where this information could be beneficial. So the ebook was just released on Amazon a couple of days ago. So you can go on there and order the ebook. The paperback version will be out this August. But if you have any questions about the book or just want to talk to me personally related to that, feel free to contact me on social media or send me an email. My email is adamcmeadows@gmail.com. And you can reach me on Facebook at Adam Meadows, and also on Instagram, AdamC_MD is my Instagram handle. So thank you guys for your time and attention today. I hope this was helpful, and maybe we can transition to the Q&A portion at this time.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Meadows. That was really fantastic, and some really great tips there for us. So we do have a couple questions. The first question is, I'm still scared about catching COVID, but my state is starting to open up and I have to go back to work. How do I ease back into normal life and overcome my fear?
Yeah, great question. And I know a lot of people are facing that same reality, where perhaps your state or your place of business is opening up soon, or you know, even now, and you still have concerns, right? And I think that is valid. Firstly, I would encourage you to have that conversation as candidly as possible with your employer or with your supervisor. If part of your anxiety or concern about returning to work is related to a personal health condition or related to a family member or someone who you live with, please, you know, speak to your employer, to your HR, to your supervisor, to have that conversation to see if perhaps there are some individual accommodations that could be afforded to you to continue a work from home capacity, or perhaps another position within the company that may decrease risk. So I think that is firstly trying to advocate for yourself and just having as frank of a conversation as you can uh, with your employer. Um, Now, let's say after that conversation, it's still the recommendation is that you have to return to work. Are there things that you can do to mitigate your chances of exposure? So the CDC recently came out with a recommendation for all of us to be wearing a cloth mask of some form when we're engaging in public spaces. And so, again, without knowing more specifics about your line of work, thinking about layers of protection, whether that's personal protective equipment if you're a healthcare worker, or wearing a cloth mask, or just maintaining a safe physical distance from other people in your place of business. So I would certainly advocate for, again, having that conversation with your employer. And then if you are required to be back on site, what can you do to try to decrease your risk as much as possible? Great question.
All right, the next question is, what are some signs that I'm depressed and need professional help versus just feeling down?
Excellent question. Yeah, that's and thank you for asking that, because there's a difference between what we would call kind of normal sadness and clinical depression, or also known as major depressive disorder. And so I encourage people to look for patterns. And so having one day or a couple of days worth of feeling down or feeling blue is not necessarily a depressive episode. So depressive episode is when you have days in a row, or weeks in a row, where the pattern is, for the majority of those days, you've been feeling down and have other associated symptoms. And so thinking about changes in sleep, changes in appetite, changes in energy level, changes in your ability to concentrate, changes in your ability to enjoy things or take interest in things, and or any type of thoughts of suicide or thoughts of dying. And that last one, any thoughts of suicide or thoughts of dying, I consider that a medical emergency. So whether or not you've had a diagnosis of depression before, or you know keeping all that separate, if you're having thoughts of suicide or thoughts of dying, or feeling so hopeless that you can't see yourself going on, that is an emergency for you to get help immediately. Either going to your nearest ER, calling 911, calling the National Suicide Hotline, whatever it takes to get help in that moment. Short of that would be looking at that pattern of other symptoms that I described, in terms of, has there been a change in your behavior or your ability to function to the point that you or someone around you is concerned that you may have depression? And that piece is very critical, in that sometimes we are not always the best judge of how we're coming across to others or how we're functioning. And so I think extending trust to loved ones, and valuing their opinions and their input can be very important during this time. So if your spouse or your roommate or your family member is saying, hey, so and so, I'm concerned about you, you've been isolated, you're not really eating the same, you're not enjoying the same things that you used to enjoy, be receptive to that, be open to listening to that. And it never hurts. It never hurts to get help, right? And so oftentimes there's a lot of stigma or misunderstanding about going to therapy. They don't know people don't know what to expect. They don't want to be labeled. They don't want to be diagnosed wrong. And I would say put that aside and just walk into it as a consultation, to have a conversation. Right? You're meeting another human being that has some professional training, and you're just starting at a place of having a conversation in a safe space. And that's one of the things that a lot of us don't always feel, is we don't necessarily feel comfortable opening up or having a safe space to have those kind of more intimate conversations. And that is what a therapist or a mental health professional is trained to do. And so being mindful of what that pattern of symptoms looks like, how long has it lasted, has it created any behavioral or functional consequences, and then accessing help. And then certainly any red flags around thoughts of suicide, thoughts of not wanting to live, please get help immediately in that case.
All right. The next question is, what would be your recommendation for students that may feel discouraged as they were abruptly sent home and did not have the opportunity to graduate?
Absolutely. That is, again, as I was saying earlier, just with the types of loss, right? Like the, experiential losses. I have very fond memories. I'm part of the high school class of 2000. And I remember there was a lot of buzz around that and a lot of celebration of, being the class of 2000, the last of the millennium, et cetera. And I think the class of 2020 has a similar type of status where they came into this year very excited, as a kind of a milestone class, and to not have the experience of the celebration of graduation is very discouraging and disheartening. And so I think firstly acknowledging that and feeling and saying that it's okay to feel discouraged. You don't have to make any apologies for that. At the same time, I think finding creative ways to still celebrate is important. I've seen some video clips of people having neighborhood drive-through graduations where they have graduates standing in their front yards in cap and gown, and the neighbors, driving around in the cul-de-sac or in the neighborhood, honking and cheering and throwing confetti from a distance. Right? I've seen a number of Zoom party graduations where, again, people are hopping on Zoom or on Skype or on Facebook Live to still connect and celebrate. And so I think, shifting expectation that yes, it's not going to be the same as an in-person stadium of being able to hug and celebrate, but still have something, right? Whether that's a neighborhood drive-through or some type of virtual experience, and still be able to give yourself credit that you are worthy, you are deserving of that same recognition, and you've earned it in the same way. Even if the graduation can't happen as expected, it's still worth celebrating.
All right. The next question is, I have a friend who seems on the extreme end of worrying about COVID. What's the best way I can support my friend, and how do I approach suggesting help?
Yeah, that's a very important point. There's a couple layers to that. I think, um, firstly, being mindful about self care, right, and thinking about your personal emotional boundaries. I've certainly been there when it comes to friends and loved ones wanting to rescue them or support them or find ways to be helpful, and that comes from a good place, and that's a good thing to do. And at the same time, that person has to be open and receptive to that help. So I think finding some way to gauge that conversation and gauge that person's readiness or willingness to receive that type of support is important, and always coming from a place of love and non-judgment. And so typically, in my experience, and what I would recommend is that difficult feedback or hard conversations are best had from a foundation of love and support, and from a place of familiarity. So if this is someone who you don't know very well, perhaps you're not the best person to have that conversation with them, and maybe there's another closer friend or family member who could have that more candid conversation. And if in this case this is one of your best friends or close friends, being able to come from a place of caring and concern, and reminding them of what was different before COVID. So, being able to tell this person like, hey, I've always enjoyed our conversations because we're able to talk about, you know, work and what we want to do with our dreams and our families and where we're going to travel. But recently, when we've spoken, it feels like the majority of our conversations, from your standpoint, center around COVID. And I'm missing the way things were. I am concerned about you. I'm wanting our communication and our friendship to still have some of the elements that it had before this crisis came into our lives. And so, if there are ways that I can support you or that I can be helpful in our friendship, I do want to be there for you. But again, kind of in that hypothetical example, leading in with some context of support of what you've enjoyed about their friendship and of what's changed with their level of worry or preoccupation, where now all they talk about is COVID. So again, coming from a non-judgmental, supportive place and being thoughtful of, is this something that you yourself emotionally can handle, if their reaction is not what you're anticipating, or do you need to get some outside support or a group of friends together to have this conversation with this person?
Next question is, do you have any tips for helping me get along with my family when my kids are cooped up in the house and we're all getting on each other's nerves?
You and the rest of the world, huh? Yeah, it's again super common, and that's part of the abruptness of this is that we are used to having certain outlets, whether it's work or school or church or a restaurant, just spaces where we can be routinely, except for being home or other than being home. Whereas now, for many people, all they have is home. And so, as lovely as it is to be around family, sometimes there's too much of a good thing. And sometimes tensions can flare. And so that's where I think each person being mindful about their own emotional needs and their own practice of self-care throughout the day. And so maybe there is time for people, doing individual activities. Maybe the kids are reading something on their iPad or doing schoolwork. Maybe you're using that time to get out and get some fresh air. Or maybe, if you and your spouse have kind of traded parenting responsibilities throughout the day, being able to kind of tag team each other out to say, hey, honey, why don't you take 15 minutes and go, relax for a little bit, and I can watch the kids now. And just being really communicative, I'd say, err on the side of over communicating. There's much worse that can happen from what's not being said than from having the hard conversations. So I think making as much time as you can to have some space, either within the house or outside of the house, where you can have some me time, so to speak, and then talking things through. The best thing about a good plan is that it can change, right? And so if the way you guys have structured the day and structured the house isn't working for you, bring that up at the next family dinner, family conversation, and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? What if we, took shifts or took turns with chores responsibilities? What if we, created family walk time outside, and then we each have our own separate time, etc. So I think this is a time for getting creative, having conversations, and being open to change if plans are not working out as intended.
And then we have one last question, which is, how do you suggest we decrease stigmas around mental health disorders?
Mm, excellent question. And this is an issue that has existed long before COVID. And I think this is how it happens. I think this is how you decrease stigma. You talk about it, you normalize it. I work with people every day that have mental health conditions. I've treated other physicians, attorneys, pilots, healthcare professionals, businessmen. It is no respecter of person, so to speak, that it is very common to have a mental health disorder, and it does not make you any less of a person, and it doesn't mean that you can't have a rich, meaningful life, right? And so I absolutely see mental health conditions the same as any other medical or physical health conditions. The brain is a part of the body, just as anything else, and sometimes the brain can get sick, and that's no judgment on you or anyone else. And that, having the conversations, talking about it, sharing your story, right? If you have a story to tell about working through a mental health challenge and overcoming it and being in recovery, share that story. Someone else can benefit from that. Many of my patients have referenced that they chose to get help once they heard that their friends were getting help, or that there was a celebrity who kind of came out about their mental health condition, or people, unfortunately, losing a loved one to suicide and saying, my, goodness, I don't want to have to face that. I need to get help before it gets to that point. And so part of how we reduce stigma is by talking about it, engaging, connecting, normalizing it, and sharing our stories.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions this evening. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Meadows. That was fantastic.
Fantastic. And thank you guys for having me. And stay well and stay healthy out there.
Thank you. You too.
All right.
So
Bye-bye,
for
guys.
everyone listening, we'd like to invite you to join us for our next webinar, which will be on Thursday, May 14 at 11 a.m. Eastern for a talk about change management, navigating the space in between, presented by Dr. Liz Molenbeek. Dr. Molenbeek is an associate professor of management and health Advent Health Endowed Chair in the School of Business Administration at Andrews University. She earned a PhD in organizational leadership from Regent University, a master's degree in hospital and healthcare administration from Xavier University, and an undergraduate degree in financial management from Andrews University. Prior to academia, she served for 13 years as a consultant and senior executive conducting strategic planning and business development for health systems and venture projects. Dr. Mullenbeck's experience has led her to the forefront of innovation in health systems design. She has served on the board of several nonprofit organizations in the education and broadcasting sectors, and currently sits on the board of a long term care facility in Louisville, Kentucky, as well as the Berrien County Historical Association in Berrien Springs, Michigan. So, again, we hope to see you next Thursday for that, and we hope you have a great evening. Thank you for joining.